Good evening, this is Viewpoint. I'm Zaka Jacob. Even as the coronavirus seems to be in control in large parts of the country, India today reported over 45,000 cases, over 30,000 of which were from one state, Kerala. What has gone wrong there? And also, should we be worried about a possible third wave which could likely infect kids, even as there's raging debate across the country on whether or not schools should reopen? To discuss all this and more, I'll be joined on the show tonight by a very special guest. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan is the Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization. She'll be joining me to answer a broad range of questions from the Kerala surge to whether schools should be reopened. Thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. First of all, let me start with the India picture. Today we have 45,000 cases. Even though the numbers are not that alarming, how would you rate or how would you assess the COVID management here in India so far?
We're at a very, I should say, challenging juncture in this pandemic, Zaka. It's an uncertain and a rather fragile situation. India has been through two big waves. The second one was really very huge and overwhelmed the health system and managed to infect a significant proportion of the Indian population. If we go by the ICMR sero surveys, about 2/3 of both adults and children have antibodies. Of course, it's a representative survey, it has its limitations, but a large proportion of the population was exposed. However, India is a huge country, and even if 2/3 are exposed, 1/3 are still susceptible and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Vaccination coverage, if you look at 2 full doses, the complete course, about, I think, somewhere around 15% of adults have achieved a full vaccination coverage, which is, we can know it's fully protective. And we see these surges happening in different states. So today we have Kerala, but in the past we've also seen some smaller states in the northeast experiencing these localized outbreaks and clusters. And so this is why I think the next few months are quite critical. It is true that, at some stage, the country will go from having massive outbreaks to having perhaps a sustained low-level to moderate-level transmission.
Okay.
It's at that point that we would call it an endemic disease.
So you did say that we are seeing surges, even though the caseload across the country might be manageable, we are seeing surges in certain states. And I want to talk about Kerala, because even today, out of that 45,000 all India that was reported, over 31,000 was from the state of Kerala. For a state who's been known for giving priority to healthcare, for having a reasonably robust healthcare system, they've not been able to control the surge, not just today or the last few days, but perhaps since April or so, Kerala has been reporting a very high number of cases. What would you attribute this to?
So when we look at transmission and what are the factors that drive it, there are a few things. One is the virus itself. The more transmissible variant, the Delta variant, certainly is able to infect. So, every 100 infected people could infect 5, 6, 7 times or even 8 times as many, given the opportunity. And this is why the R has gone up to above 1.1 in Kerala. Second is the opportunities for transmission, which is the social mixing. Yeah. And again, this is the time when we're entering into the festival season. Onam was recently celebrated in Kerala. Other states are going to have festivals coming up. And if we let our guard down and if people gather in large gatherings, mass gatherings, and again, we've seen this across the world, mass gatherings lead to spikes in infection a couple of weeks later. So that's the second. And the third variable, of course, here is the level of immunity in the population, either due to natural infection or due to vaccination coverage. And because Kerala did relatively well in controlling the infection for the first year of the pandemic, the sero surveys showed that it has probably the lowest level of sero prevalence in the country at about 44%, which means there's a larger susceptible pool of people out there. And therefore, the virus has every possibility to spread. So when these 3 conditions are there, then the virus is going to transmit. So what we need to do now, you can't do anything about the Delta variant. It's already there. You can ramp up vaccination coverage and you can cut down social mixing and certainly avoid all mass gatherings.
I want to ask you about this back and forth that's been going on between the WHO and Bharat Biotech, the makers of Covaxin. Can you share the status of the negotiation there? Because I think they moved the papers for WHO approval back in June, so it's been a couple of months. How soon do you expect Covaxin approval by the WHO?
What I would say is I think it's at a very advanced stage now. And the back and forth is a perfectly normal exercise. Because when the regulatory team actually examines the dossier, they invariably have questions, whichever vaccine it is. And so this is a normal procedure. And WHO committed that in about 6 weeks, they would expedite as much as possible the processing of the application. But again, every time there is a back and forth and questions are asked, it adds a few days. So now I believe that this is all in the final stages of compiling all the data that remained, and the technical advisory group will be meeting in the first half of September. So I anticipate that by mid-September that there will be a decision.
You had said a few days ago that you foresee the future of this disease, the future of this virus, to move from a pandemic stage to an endemic stage. What may that mean, though, to ordinary people? How may we have to change our response, our behavior, once this disease moves into the endemic stage?
So what it means really when we say something is endemic is that the pathogen is there in the population, in the community, and that it's circulating. So that's when we call something endemic. And from time to time, it can increase, again, due to many factors. It could be seasonal, like influenza, or it could be related, again, to opportunities where susceptible people, those who don't have immunity, they get exposed to the virus, and then you can get outbreaks. But what it means is that you will continue to see over months and years, some people will get this infection.
Okay.
And if they are well protected, their immune responses are good because of prior exposure, because of vaccination, then it may pass off as either a common cold or as an upper respiratory infection or like an influenza-like illness. There will be, however, people, particularly the vulnerable, the elderly, who might also get very sick. They need hospitalization, and you would have some ongoing deaths due to this. Okay. It's similar to, even though influenza and this virus are very different, this is what happens with influenza, despite the vaccines that we have, which are not as good as the vaccines we have for COVID. Now, what it means, what it implies for all of us is that we, first of all, need to ensure that we have maximum level of immunity in the population, particularly amongst the vulnerable.
And finally, Doctor, just in terms of this debate that it happened in the US and the UK some months ago, it's happening right now in India, about whether a possible future wave could affect children disproportionately, and to that extent, this debate about reopening schools. How would you weigh in on this?
The impact of children being out of school is, I believe, far, far greater than the impact of some children getting the infection. We know that children can get the infection. They can pass it on to others. But of the countries that kept schools open throughout the pandemic have learned that schools have not been the drivers of transmission in the community. If a community has high rates of transmission going on, then that spills over into schools and you start seeing clusters. But if the coronavirus infection rates in the community are very low, then the risks that schools will become the places which will drive transmission has not been borne out by studies. And moreover, we know now how to make it as safe as possible, how to improve the ventilation as much as possible, try to maintain a distance. Certainly children over 6 should wear masks. All adults working in schools around children should be vaccinated.
All right.
And there should be some regular monitoring and testing going on. So if we put these in place, these mitigation measures, I think that the benefits to children of opening schools will outweigh the risks. And many states have now opened schools for senior schools and considering opening them. we can learn from the experience of those countries and those states that have done this successfully.
All right, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Thank you for your time. All right, the other big news concerning corona and the vaccines, the current 84-day gap, that's a 12-week gap between the two doses of Covishield, could be reduced. Top government sources have told CNN News 18 that further discussions are taking place with the National Technical Advisory Group. Originally, the gap between the two doses was anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks. Later, it was increased to the current 12 to 16 weeks. Runjan's now joining us live with more details. Is this linked in any way to availability and supply and demand? Because at the time that it was increased, this dosage gap to 12 weeks, there was a dire shortage. There were queues of people thronging hospitals, not getting enough supply of vaccines. Now the situation seems to have eased quite considerably. So is that why there is a thinking that maybe it might be a good idea to reduce the gap?
Zaka, as far as the government is concerned, they have said that their thought process has been very clear, that the dosage gap between the vaccines has never been based on the supply chain. In fact, the very reason for either increasing or decreasing the dosage gap has been science. We've seen that science has been evolving. There's more data that is coming. There's international data, for example, in the UK, that has further reduced the Covishield gap back to 8 weeks. There are many studies that are also pointing out to the fact, Zaka, that as far as the Delta variant is concerned, that has created havoc not just here in the country, but in several parts of the world. That also works. The Covishield dose works better when it's given an 8-week gap. So that's the thinking process within the government. Remember, on 13th of May, when the gap between the two Covishield doses was increased to 12 to 16 weeks, just 3 days after that, the UK had again pushed back the gap back to 8 weeks. So the government has been studying a lot of data, the international studies that have been coming out, and there's a thinking within the government, and it's a possibility that as far as the Covishield vaccine is concerned, the gap may be reduced. Very quickly, Zaka, another point is when you look at the people in the country that have been immunized, there's a huge gap between the people who received their first dose and the people who received their second dose, because Covishield is a vaccine that is given after 3 months. So that is also something that could, in fact, level out if this, in fact, decision is taken, because the government wants to, at priority, vaccinate the entire adult population. Okay,
Runjan, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. The possibility of reducing the gappage, the dosage gap between the two shots of Covishield. Let's now go to this piece of breaking news again concerning Kerala. Kerala is now reporting the latest numbers, 30,000 cases. So 2 days straight now, the state has been reporting 30,000 or more cases. There have been a little under 19,000 recoveries and 162 deaths in the last 24 hours. Neetu has more details on this. For the second straight day, 30,000 cases. Neetu, what's the government saying?
Second day in a row, 30,000 cases. The numbers are huge. There are concerns, but at the same time, what they are saying is that this is not completely on unexpected things. They have been expecting a surge. And what we understand from the health department is that the cases could go up to 45,000 in the next couple of days, because that is what they are expecting. What they are saying is that it's not possible to go on a never-ending lockdown, where Kerala already had a lot of restrictions for a long period of time. So somewhere there has to be a balance between life and livelihood, and that's how they have decided to open up on August 5. Even now, what they're saying is that micro-containment measures would be strengthened. There will be more testing happening in the coming days, and they are trying to identify as many cases, at the same time increasing the vaccination. We don't think that the state will be going into a lockdown at the moment, Zaka.
All right, so let's see how this story plays out. The state not keen at all on going back into a lockdown. Can they manage with such heavy caseloads? Because we've seen this across the country, across the world. What COVID does is it really puts pressure on the health infrastructure in different parts as the cases go up. It's not so much the mortality of those cases. It's not so much whether there'll be a large number of fatalities as a consequence. It is simply the extra pressure, the extra burden on the healthcare system in those various states. Let's see if Kerala is able to manage. Meanwhile, this is a shocker of a story. 9 years after the Nirbhaya gang rape, a case that almost mirrors what happened in 2012, now has come from the state of Karnataka. A 23-year-old MBA student was gang raped by 4 men just outside Mysuru, while her male friend, who she was accompanying at that time, was attacked by the culprits. While the Karnataka Chief Minister has vowed strict action, the State Home Minister has added insult to injury by saying that the victim should not have been out in an isolated area like that in the very first place.
The girl was gang raped and she is hospitalized. It's really totally unwanted, unfortunate incident. Right. My government has taken it very seriously, and we are after them, and we're trying to hear from the victims also, and we are joining the dots. Very soon they'll be caught and they'll be booked to justice.
ರೇಪು ಆಗಿದ್ದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಕಾಂಗ್ರೆಸ್ನವರು ನನ್ನ ರೇಪ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ, ಈ ಹೋಮ್ ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟರ್ ರೇಪ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. 7-7:30 ಅವರು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರ್ಜನವಾದಂಥ ಪ್ರದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ. ಮೊದಲನೇದಾಗಿ ಹೋಗಬಾರ್ದಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಯಾರನ್ನೂ ಹೋಗಬೇಡಿ, ಎಲ್ಲೂ ಹೋಗಬೇಡಿ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ತಡಿಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೇನು ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೇನು ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೋ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹೋದಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರ್ಜನ ಪ್ರದೇಶ, ಹೇಳಿ ಕೇಳಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಇರಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಯಾರೂ ಹೋಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವಾಗ ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಗರುಡವಾಹನ ಅದು ಇದು ಏನು ತಿರುಗಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ರಸ್ತೆನಲ್ಲಿ.
Balakrishnan joining us with more details on this story. It's bad enough what happened to this young woman, but the Home Minister, no less than the State Home Minister, putting the blame on the victim. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is unacceptable. Let's try and see if we can go across to Deepa in just a second. This is the Karnataka Home Minister Araga Gyanendra, who is saying that the victim in question should not have been in such a desolate, isolated place at that time of the night. Not least the fact that Chamundi Hills is a very, very popular tourist destination. People often drive up from Bengaluru to that place and come back. Deepa is now joining us. Deepa, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around what the Home Minister has said, blaming the victim. How far have the police got in trying to trace down the culprits of this heinous crime?
From the victim and her friend, but they haven't been able to actually get a lead on who is the accused. They've been able to question a large number of people. They're trying to contact, trying to trace through the cell phone towers around that area, the phones that were active around that area, but at the same time they've not really made any arrests so far. And this is, caused greater apprehension because the Home Minister, as the Home Minister said, one of the things he talked about is there has been quite a bit of outrage that there was not enough patrolling in this area. It's a prominent tourist hub. It's a pilgrim center as well. The Chamundi Hill leads up to the Chamundeshwari temple, which is the deity that is taken around during the Dasara parade. So certainly it's a lot of, led to a lot of shock, and the Home Minister's statement, of course, causing even greater shock, asking why should the girl have been going to an isolated area like this at that time.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. That's Deepa Balakrishnan for us reporting from Bengaluru. Meanwhile, the centre today held an all-party meeting on the crisis in Afghanistan. After the Taliban takeover, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar briefed all floor leaders of different political parties on the evolving situation in the war-torn country. He said that the government's immediate priority is the evacuation of all Indians from Afghanistan.
All of us, political parties, including the government, is that on this matter we all have a very similar view. We have a strong national position on Afghanistan. The friendship with the Afghan people is something which matters to all of us. So we approach this situation very much in a spirit of, I would say, national unity.
सर, आप लोग ने बहुत चिंता जाहिर की थी कि अफगानिस्तान में लोगों का क्या होगा. क्या सरकार से जवाब से संतुष्ट है, क्योंकि ये देश हित का मसला है?
सरकार कह रहे हैं कि हम सारे कोशिश कर रहे हैं, हमारे सारे प्रयास जारी है. तो हम क्या कहेंगे कि क्या प्रयास जारी है? सरकार को तो भरोसा करना पड़ेगा, सरकार ऊपर तो भरोसा करना पड़ेगा हमें. हम क्या करें? हम सरकार को पूछ रहे हैं कि भाई ये क्या हो रहा है. वो कह रहे हैं, सरकार कहते कि भरोसा करो. तो सरकार पे भरोसा करना हमारा जिम्मेदारी जरूर होते हैं. देश की हित के लिए, देश की सुरक्षा हमारे लिए सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा है। सरकार कहते हैं कि हम हर किस्म की कोशिश करें, सारे स्टेक होल्डर के साथ हम जो हमारा चर्चा करने के लिए कोशिश कर रहे हैं। ये तो कह ही चुके हैं सरकार।
All right, so the government giving a primer of what exactly is going on in Afghanistan, the status of the evacuation efforts. Remember, close to 1,000 folks, many of them Indian nationals and also some Afghan nationals who had been helping with the embassy and other, of course, projects that India was undertaking in Afghanistan. Many of them have been brought back. So while the discussion primarily focused on that, we're now joined by Maha Siddiqui, our Foreign Affairs editor. While the discussion primarily focused on the evacuation efforts, did the government apprise these members of parliament about what is the official position or what is the thinking in the government as to how to engage with this Taliban regime in Afghanistan?
Yes, Zaka, they did. And in fact, the government told the members of parliament that it's going to be wait and watch to see how the new setup of the Taliban is, whether it is an inclusive representative government, whether they include other Afghan leaders as well. Remember, the Taliban is talking to the likes of Hamid Karzai, Dr. Abdullah. They are also now in touch with the resistance forces from Panjshir as well. So India is looking to see what kind of government is formed by Taliban, whether it is different from what we saw between 1996 and 2001. They're also looking at how the countries in the region respond to this. We know what Pakistan's position is going to be like. It's no secret that they were anyway emboldening Taliban. But we'll wait to see how China responds, whether they continue to draw that thin line between working with the Taliban and recognizing them, especially Russia as well. And Prime Minister Modi had a 45-minute long conversation with President Vladimir Putin as well a couple of days ago. Russia too is drawing a line between engaging with the Taliban and recognizing them. They are saying, we have still not recognized them. We will not merely go by their claims. We will see the actions on the ground, how they respond to the situation. And India will also look at the democracies in the West. Looking at this whole picture, India will take a call. Basically, Zaka, most countries are buying time. Most of the countries have given in to the fact that they will ultimately have to engage with the Taliban, and so will India.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Maha Siddiqui, many thanks for joining us. Meanwhile, as we wrap up, time is running out for people who are wanting to leave Afghanistan before the August 31st deadline. Is that deadline feasible at all? CNN's Britt Conway with the details.
The weight, the fear, the exhaustion, the desperation. Emotions running high at Kabul International Airport. This is the moment they're all waiting for, hoping for. In just 24 hours between Tuesday and Wednesday, about 19,000 people were evacuated. And more than 82,000 have been flown out of Kabul since August 14th. But there are at least 500 and maybe as many as 1,500 Americans waiting to get out, not to mention Afghan allies. But U.S. troops are set to leave August 31st.
I don't see how we can get out what I think is a higher number of American citizens, not to mention the Afghan interpreters.
The Secretary of State says he believes it can be done.
We're on track to complete our mission by August 31st, provided the Taliban continue to cooperate and there are no disruptions to this effort.
But disruption is already happening. There are reports the Taliban is blocking Afghans from the airport. And a U.S. defense official says an attack by ISIS-K, a sworn enemy of the Taliban, is a very real threat.
We're operating in a hostile environment.
Contingency plans are in the works and the possibility of continued efforts even after the official operation ends. After that, for the future of this country in chaos.
That intense diplomatic work is ongoing.